Jesus is, he never wrote anything. You never find one book where at the end of the book it says, love Jesus. And then there's another problem with Jesus is there's literally no historical information about him. There are scholars who basically take the position that there was never such a person in history, because there's no corroborating information, no historical written evidence about this person that even existed. But James has both issues resolved. James is a recoverable historical figure. We have plenty of documentation about James. And James wrote a book called the Epistle of James. So you'd think James would be a very important person. And not only was a brother of Jesus, listen to this, he was the leader of the movement for 30 years after Jesus was crucified. So we have someone that led the movement for 30 years because he was a relative of Jesus, a brother. And we have one more piece of information about James. He had a nickname. His nickname was James the Just, probably Yaakov HaTzadik. Now, why would someone have been called a tzaddik back then? So we know from historical sources he was called a tzaddik because he was very frum. He was extremely careful in his Torah observance. Now, this might cause many people to wonder, wait a second, the brother of Jesus who runs the whole show for 30 years is a Torah observant Jew? Now, does this have implications for how we look at Jesus? Let me share with you the following. The conventional wisdom is that Jesus, 2,000 years ago, rejected Judaism, started his own religion, and it went downhill from there. That's the conventional wisdom. There is very, very good reason to believe that that's not the case. One of the great Torah sages of the 17th century was Rav Yaakov Emden. Rav Yaakov Emden says in one of his letters that Jesus actually was a Torah observant Jew. A Torah observant Jew. We find evidence of this in the Christian Bible itself. Because every time the question of Torah observance comes up, every time it comes up, Jesus is telling his followers to follow the Torah, how important it is. He says in the 5th chapter of Matthew, "Think not that I've come to the world to nullify or abolish the Torah and the prophets." He says, I've not come to abolish them, on the contrary, to fulfill them. And he says, therefore, anyone who teaches people to keep the least of these commandments will be called the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who teaches people not to keep the least of these commandments will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. And then a young man comes to Jesus and says, "Good teacher, what shall I do to inherit the kingdom to come, kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? There's only one who is good, and that is God. And if you want to go to heaven, keep the commandments." This is over and over and over again. And then we discover that his brother James is extremely religious. And we know that the entire movement, it was a small movement, but all of the followers of Jesus were very, very Torah observant. Watch what happens. After the Gospels are completed, after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Jesus is dead, the next book in the Christian Bible, the next book is called the Book of Acts, A-C-T-S. And it's actually called Acts of the Apostles. Acts of the Apostles, who are the followers of Jesus, the students of Jesus, the 12 apostles, which makes sense. He's gone, so the story now picks up with his Talmidim, his students. What's peculiar about this book, the Acts of the Apostles, is when you read it, there's almost nothing in this book about the apostles of Jesus. Very little about them. And almost the entire book is about someone named Paul of the city of Tarsus who never met Jesus once in his life, never even saw him from a mile away. But Paul claims that Jesus came to him in a vision and said, "You are to be my follower. You're to follow me." So if you were Paul and this happened to you, Jesus comes to you in a vision, "Follow me." What are you going to do? You don't know anything about Jesus, not one thing he taught, none of his philosophy, none of his mission. What would you do if you were Paul and you had this vision? So what would be seichel-dik is, you'd go to Jerusalem, meet with James, his brother, meet with Peter, meet with the other apostles, and learn who was Jesus. These are the people that were with Jesus for the past 3 years, every day learning from him. So that's what Paul should have done. But he writes in his letters, "And I didn't go to Jerusalem to meet with James and Peter. I didn't go there." And he begins preaching his own message. But his own message is diametrically opposed to everything that Jesus and John the Baptizer preached.